We're here today talking with Paul Zylstra about one of his books, Our Spiritual Compass, The Conscience and Morality. He's got several books, and we'll get to hear about some of those today. But first off, thanks for joining us, Paul.
Hello. Uh, yes, I'm happy to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me.
So why don't you tell us about this book, Our Spiritual Compass?
Our Spiritual Compass is a book primarily about the conscience and what the Bible has to say about the conscience. It's divided into three parts. The first part is the makeup of man, and I talk about all the immaterial parts of man, including the spirit, the soul, the heart, and the various aspects of the heart, the flesh, the will, the mind, the conscience, and so forth. And it breaks down everything that the Bible has to say about what these things are. And most people don't understand that the Bible has a lot to say about the things that you don't see in man, is the parts that are obscure. The second part of the book is what the Bible has to say about the conscience. The conscience is mentioned in the New Testament 32 times, and yet you never hear a sermon on it. At least very rarely do you hear a sermon on it. But it has a lot to say about the conscience. In the Old Testament, there is no Hebrew word for conscience, but it is alluded to quite often. And one of the primary places you find the conscience is at the fall of man. Of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it. For in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. Well, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil reflects the conscience. And up to the point where man partook of the forbidden fruit, man did not have a conscience. He was naked and unashamed. But as soon as man partook of that forbidden fruit, he sewed fig leaves together because he realized he was naked, and he was ashamed to approach God. So we we actually acquired the conscience at the fall, and it's interesting because animals don't have the conscience. They exhibit loyalty, but the same dog that you let play with your kids can be trained to be an attack dog. So animals have no sense of conscience. Angels have no sense of conscience because they didn't acquire it the way that man did. And God has used that through the ages to help man understand that he's a sinner. And that's what it does. The conscience convicts us that we've done evil things. It either excuses or accuses us, as Romans 2 says. So it is integral to the aspect of salvation in our understanding of sin. Um, so the Bible has an awful lot to say about the conscience. There are actually 11 different types of conscience that it goes through. The third part of the book, and the last part, is about a 200-year history of morality and how the conscience relates to morality. And it's interesting because there are a lot of understandings that we have that have changed over the past 200 years. If you go back to Webster's 1828 dictionary and you look up things like ethics and morality, you find that ethics is of the individual. It comes from a Greek word ethnos, which means character. So it applies to an individual. It is his understanding of what is right and wrong. The term morality is from traditions, mores. It's of society or the group. Well, nowadays they turn that on its head, and the modern definitions say that morality is of the individual, and ethics is of a group. It doesn't necessarily mean society, but it means of a group, like the ethics of engineers or the ethics of teachers or something like that. So they've actually turned definitions on their heads, and it makes people have trouble understanding what the role is of morality in their life. And I also go through how that has been affected by different philosophies and different teachings, and how it's played out in the court system with case law, and also in decision making, various things in government. So the conscience is as applied to morality is broken down in the book from a historical perspective, a 200-year, at least 200-year historical perspective. I also talk about at the end of the book how the conscience needs to be applied today to certain things that to protect people from being abused by government. The conscience is violated when it comes to people who do not want to bake cakes for homosexual weddings. They don't want to supply flowers to these weddings, and no one should be required to violate their conscience. No one should be required to do something that they consider to be sinful and evil, or to support something that they consider to be sinful and evil. And if they consider what they're doing to be participation in it, then they should be allowed to avoid it. So that is the summary of the book itself.
So this book is part of a series of 4 books that you have written or are in the process of written. So kind of talk us through what was the inspiration or what led to you writing this book and others as well.
Well, the others as well would include one that is already on audiobook. It's titled Christian Conviction versus State Persecution. And this was about the independent Christian school movement in the state of Nebraska from 1977 to 1984, when the state of Nebraska came against the Mennonites, the Amish, the Baptists, the Pentecostals, and several religious groups. And they literally violated the conscience of every one of these groups when it came to the education of their children. So that was, this documents the why my interest in the conscience. And it is something that, as it also explains in the book, we learned about in our church fellowship. We studied the conscience very, very closely in order to make sure that we were getting it right when it came to our objections and how we presented them.
Why don't you share a little bit more? I think you have maybe even some copies of the other books, but before we close, I want to give you a chance just to share a little bit about some of the other books that you've written and this series that you have.
Well, there is one book yet to be written, and that book is Our Spiritual Restoration, Repentance, Forgiveness, and Reconciliation. That will be the last book in the series. It was actually the first book that I put together, and I wrote the notes while I was stationed in Baghdad with the Army Corps of Engineers. The first book of the series was Our Spiritual Enemies, the World, the Flesh, and the Devil. And you'll notice it's red, as the people sometimes associate red with the devil. So that's why I made it red. The second book is the one we're talking about today, Our Spiritual Compass, the Conscience and Morality. That's black and white because the conscience is right or wrong, black and white. The last one here is Our Spiritual Destiny, Death in the Hereafter. And this is about what happens when people die. And it's supposed to be an encouragement for Christians. That's what it's for. But all of these are on the spiritual life, and they're kind of a practical guide to Christian wanting to live for God. One of these, is being placed on audiobook now. That's Our Spiritual Compass. I hope to have all four of them actually eventually on audiobook.
Yeah, so Paul mentioned that all of his books are available through Amazon. You can go on there, you can find any of them available through Amazon, also Barnes and Noble. And then, as he said, the book that we're focusing on today, Our Spiritual Compass, the Conscience and Morality, has just been released on Audiobook Network. And so we want to highlight that. What that means is you can get it if you are an Audible subscriber. You can download it on Audible. You can also get it on the Books app through iTunes and audio there as well. But like I said, you can purchase all of his books online through Amazon. Paul, we thank you for taking time to join us. Was there anything else you wanted to share with us before we end today?
It is incumbent upon every believer to live by faith. And whatsoever is not of faith is sin. And that is actually a direct reference to the conscience out of Romans 14. And we need to be willing to say yes to that which is good and no to that which is evil. So keep that in mind and live of a clear conscience, of a good conscience.
Thank you again for sharing with us. I'll leave it with that. We appreciate you, Paul.